Okay, well, I just want to welcome everybody tonight to our telecall with Dr. Jeff Teckman. Dr. Teckman's going to talk about the latest information on research into Alpha-1 liver disease. I'm hoping with an emphasis on kids. He's a pediatric gastroenterologist and hepatologist and professor of pediatrics in biochemistry and molecular biology at the St. Louis University School of Medicine. He's also the director of pediatric gastroenterology and hepatology at Cardinal Glennon Children's Medical Center. And he's also served as the associate chair of pediatrics for research. He looks after kids with GI and liver problems, and of course, including Alpha-1. I've had the pleasure of hearing Dr. Teckman speak at a number of conferences, and I think you guys are all going to have a good time tonight and learn quite a bit. I just want to remind everybody that we're recording this meeting, so if you're concerned about your confidentiality, you don't have to use your name when you're asking questions. You can just use your first name or even a pseudonym. So without further ado, I think I'll just turn things over to Dr. Teckman and give him the time to speak instead of listening to me. So, Jeff, thank you very much for being here, and take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I thought I'd just take a few minutes to kind of give you an overview of a few things, and then we can open it up for questions. So, as you have said, Jim, so kindly, so I'm a pediatric liver doctor, and I've been studying how alpha-1 antitrypsin damages the liver, and I started that in 1993. And we've been involved in both laboratory-based studies and studies using animals where we try to figure out how the liver gets hurt, and then we figure out if there are medications we can use to block the damage. And I've also been involved in research in humans, in new drug treatments, as well as in other studies. And we've come a long way. I mean, in almost 20 years, when I first started on alpha-1 antitrypsin, we really didn't hardly know how the liver got hurt. We knew that in alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, people carry the Z gene. Usually, there are other genes, but typically that's the one involved in liver disease. And if you have two copies of Z, if you're ZZ, then your liver produces an abnormal version of the alpha-1 protein. Normally, the liver produces huge amounts of alpha-1 and then dumps it into the bloodstream every day. But if you're ZZ, the liver makes an abnormal protein, and it can't be released into the blood. It just stays in the liver and builds up in there. And the liver...
About an hour.
I'm sorry?
About an hour.
Oh, it's just background. I'll just remind people that we said this earlier. If you want to mute your phone right now, it's *6*, and then to unmute at question time, it's *6* again. But anyway, so in ZZ alpha-1 deficiency, the liver makes huge amounts of alpha-1, but it stays in the liver and does not get released into the blood. And when I first started studying alpha-1, we were pretty sure that the buildup of the abnormal Z protein in the liver caused liver disease, but we weren't even completely sure. But now we've come a really long way in understanding exactly what happens inside the liver cell when that happens, and then how damage to one cell in the liver might cause damage to the whole organ. Your liver usually does many, many jobs for you. It makes part of your blood and removes waste products from your body and helps you digest food, especially fats. And if your liver is working normally, you're unaware of it. Everybody's kind of aware of your heart beating and you're aware of breathing, and but you're not aware of your liver working if it's working fine. And even if your liver gets sick, often you have no symptom until it's very, very advanced. So many of our studies in recent years have, since we've learned a lot about how the liver gets hurt, we've now turned to studying how to block that. I mean, it's hard to fix something you don't know how it works, right? I mean, if your car breaks down and you don't know how the engine works, your chance of fixing it is remote. So first you have to know how your engine works, and then you can know how to fix it if it breaks. And that's what we've done in research in Alpha-1 the last couple decades. We've figured out how it works, and now we're going to figure out how to keep it from breaking. And that last step of really figuring out a medication or treatment that's going to work involves both work in a laboratory and work with patients. And so there have been a number of studies, and let me kind of touch on some of the big ones that are going on. First off, we still have a lot of questions about the liver disease in Alpha-1 in terms of who gets sick, at what age they get sick, how fast the disease progresses, because it's highly variable. Some people will live a very long, normal life and never have liver problems. Other people get sick as children and need liver transplants as children. So there's a wide variation. And we don't really understand the reason for that yet. There's been a lot of work on that, but we don't have that answer. And so a number of years ago, a study which is mostly in the United States but also involves some investigators in Canada. And when we first started this study, it was, it's all these acronyms for studies. It was first called CLIC. Now it's called Children, which stands for Childhood Liver Disease Research and Education Network. But the Children study involves many liver diseases that affect children, but Alpha-1 being one of the most common ones. And the goal of the Children study is to enroll several hundred children with Alpha-1 and young adults. It's from birth to 25 years of age is the age range that can be enrolled. And then we follow them yearly for a number of years and collect their medical data, collect blood samples, collect DNA, collect family history information. We put all that into a database. And then over time, we see who gets sick, who doesn't get sick, and we try to figure out what happened and how we can stop it. We're also beginning to look at the DNA of those patients because they're obviously, as we said, you can have two people that are both ZZ. One person gets a liver transplant, one person doesn't. So there are probably other genes other than the Alpha-1 gene that they inherit which influence liver disease. And one of the studies we're doing in the children's study is we're comparing, and of course this is using computers. I mean, computers are so incredibly powerful now. We all have about 22,000 or so genes, and that's pretty complicated, but computers do things really fast. So we can scan, or we're planning to in this next year or so, we can scan all the DNA in the patients in the children's study that got liver transplants and compare it to all the DNA in the patients in the children's study who never got a liver transplant. And we look for genes which would predict who would be in which group, and then hopefully we could develop a test from that so that when someone's diagnosed, we'd be able to do another test and figure out if they're at risk for liver disease. And if we find out what that gene does, we can design a treatment that could block it or somehow use that information. So the children's study involves 15 centers in North America that are children's hospitals. The only one in Canada is Toronto. And when we first started the study, which was 5 or 6 years ago, our target was 150 patients, but we went so well we expanded to 300, and now we've expanded to 400 patients because we've now reached about 292, and we still have some money and we still have some time to enroll, so we're still interested in more patients. And you don't have to live in one of the cities to be in the study, and you don't have to transfer your medical care to one of the study doctors or hospitals in order to be in it. And I have a number of patients who I'm not their doctor, but they come to me to be in the study. We think that's a really great way to contribute. It's very low risk. It's just blood samples and keeping track of medical information. But it's an incredibly powerful study that's going to really tell us a lot about the liver disease in young people with Alpha-1. There's a great website, and it's childrennetwork.org. So that's childrennetwork.org. And if you Google Children Network, I think it's the first thing that comes up. So we definitely think that that's a great thing, and look at the website or contact me by email, or and I'll be happy to hook you up with who's ever the closest to you. We do have a site in Seattle. We have sites in Pittsburgh, Baltimore, as I said, Toronto, Chicago. So we think this is really good. Now we're trying to get a similar thing started for adult liver disease in Alpha-1, and amazingly, there's been no study which has followed a group of Alpha-1 adults and looked at their liver over time. All the studies of adult liver problems in Alpha-1 have either been autopsy studies, that is, studying people who have already died, or just studies where one doctor just wrote up the patients they saw. In the last 10 years I've seen 20 patients with Alpha-1 liver disease, and I'm just going to tell people about that. But there's been really in the 50 years this disease has been described, there's been no organized look at Alpha-1 in adults, and we're trying to do that. Now, we've just gotten some funding from the Alpha-1 Foundation to begin what's hopefully going to be a study several years long, but we've just started the very beginning. We're trying to look at least starting in 2013, 100 ZZ adults and look at their livers, and these are both people that know they have liver disease and people that have never had liver disease. So we're going to look at some of both, and we're going to follow these people every year for 5 years, collect information, collect their DNA. They will have liver biopsies at the beginning because that's the best way to know what's going on in the liver, unless they've had one recently from their doctor or something. And again, in an effort to understand who is at risk for getting sick, if the liver is sick, how fast does it get worse, and what do we think we can do to stop it. So that, again, very exciting, very good. We think it's going to be very productive. Unfortunately, at the moment that we only have 3 sites, we're trying to get a 4th site for that study. One's in Florida, one's in St. Louis, and one's in San Diego. We do have some money to offset travel costs, but we probably can't offset 100%. But if anyone wants more information, we're just getting started. We're not ready to enroll yet, but send me an email or give me a call. Some other exciting research work I'll tell you about. A number of years ago, so back in the 90s, we made a discovery in the lab. Remember I said that the alpha-1Z protein builds up in the liver and causes liver damage. And the liver's pretty smart. The liver recognizes that this abnormal protein is building up, and so the liver activates some recycling pathways to try to break down the alpha-1 protein and recycle the constituents so that it doesn't build up too much and hurt the liver. And we discovered a number of years ago that there was a certain pathway inside cells, it's called autophagy, and that autophagy was very important in this recycling process and protecting the liver from damage. And since then, we've studied this very intensely, and we've identified several medications that in animals, so in mice, we have mice that develop alpha-1 liver disease, just like people do. So the mice are very useful to try to develop new medications. So we have several drugs that in mice use this autophagy pathway to break down the bad alpha-1 in the liver and allow the liver to be healthy. And that's very exciting. Unfortunately, the doses we have to use in mice are 10 times what you can give a person. So we still are doing a lot of work in our laboratory and with drug companies to try to develop a medication that's going to be able to do that job, but it's going to be safe to give to people and not in mega doses, because most people realize that if you give 10 times of any medication to a person, that's probably going to be an overdose and it won't be a good thing. However, there is a study, and it's going on just in Pittsburgh, and the study is for people who already have severe liver damage. They're basically people who would be on liver transplant lists but not transplanted yet. And that study is using one of these drugs, not in the 10-time dose, but in a low dose, which is likely to be safe, although we don't know how effective it's going to be. But there is that opportunity, and you have to travel to Pittsburgh, and and have tests done. And but there is this, and hopefully over the next couple of years, there may be other studies that would look at similar medications that would make use of this autophagy pathway. And if you want more information, you can talk to me or talk to Pittsburgh, or there's also the clinicaltrials.gov, which is a website that's supported by the NIH and through the U.S. government, and it lists every clinical trial for pretty much any disease all over the world. So it's clinicaltrials.gov, and there's a little search bar there, and you put in the disease, and it tells you all the opportunities all over for anything from Alpha-1 to Alzheimer's. So that's a great resource, by the way. It's been announced that there are several drug companies which are working on Alpha-1 drugs, and one of the drug companies has announced that they're interested in 2013 trying a new technology that would get rid of the Alpha-1 built up in the liver. And the drug company is based in San Diego, California. And again, they've had some press releases that have talked about, wanting to have a trial soon. That no date has been announced, but again, I think in 2013 these things are going to come to pass, and I'm sure there'll be an interest in having patients involved in explaining how this new medication could work. So again, if anyone's interested in knowing more about these things or participating in the future, send me an email or contact me. Just because you would contact me doesn't mean you are committing you have to do it. It just means that you're interested in more information, and I can hook you up with the right people or I'll give you the information that you need. So we've come a long way from not really knowing what's going on to knowing what's going on in the Alpha-1 liver, at least to a good degree. We still have a lot to learn, but we've learned a lot, and enough that we can now start to propose medications and treatments that we think are going to be very effective. So it's very exciting, and that's kind of an overview for a few minutes. So I'll stop and let people ask questions. Don't forget to unmute,
Dr. Teckman. Actually, can we start with Elizabeth? You had a question you asked me before Dr. Teckman came on the line, and I think that might be a good place to start.
Surgeon in Vancouver, Canada, that there had been a cure found somewhere in Europe, and he had actually gone as far as transferring my grandson to another surgeon with a view to getting the cure, and he said it was genetic.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question exactly.
Well, I wondered if you had heard of any cures for Alpha-1, because he said that there was one on the horizon that had been found in Europe somewhere, and it was a genetic gene you put into the body that cured it. So this was from our surgeon.
Well, there's certainly been a lot of research in genetic therapies. There's no cure that I'm aware of, unfortunately. There has been interest in and we've done this in animals where we can take a medication and it will go into the liver and insert the normal gene instead of the bad Alpha-1 gene. We'll put in a good Alpha-1 gene into most of the cells in the liver, and we can do that in a mouse. There have been gene therapy studies in humans, but they haven't been very successful, and there have been quite a few complications. Several patients in those trials have come down with cancer, and so there's been sort of more work to do in terms of gene therapy trials for humans. I'm not aware of the specific thing you're talking about in Europe. There have been a number of people in Europe that have looked at gene therapy trials, and David Lomas at Cambridge in the United Kingdom has recently done some research using technology to try to take cells from a person with Alpha-1 and again correct the gene and try to show how that could be used as a treatment. But that's not been done in people. That's been done in a test tube. So I'm afraid I don't know any more than that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Are there any more questions?
Eileen, I'd like to ask a question.
Go ahead.
Are any of the trials done on people who are already receiving prolactin, or do you have to be in the virgin group?
Some of that is still being decided, but I think there will be opportunities for people who are on prolactin. Some of the trials may involve stopping for a period of weeks or a few months or something like that, but not necessarily. So, I think a lot of that depends on what the medication is supposed to do and how it's supposed to work and how it's delivered. So, I wouldn't count myself out just because I was on prolactin. I think, you always have the opportunity to find information and to get information. And if you don't want to do the trial, if they say, well, you have to stop your prolactin for X period of time, you don't want to do it, then you can say, no thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rob. I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
Okay. My son has been identified as Alpha-1, so I don't really have a lot of background here. But you mentioned I understand the protein is abnormal and can't be released out of the liver, and that it builds up in the liver. The idea that it's recycled is new to me by the liver naturally. But if I'm understanding that correctly, it's not completely recycled naturally. That this testing that you're looking at is a way to enhance that. Is that what you were describing?
Right. So, yeah, good thinking. I mean, you picked up immediately on the thing that we don't know. So I was trying to cover up my ignorance, but you revealed it. So the liver in an adult, the liver makes about 2 grams of alpha-1 antitrypsin per day.
Okay.
So that's a lot, right? Mm-hmm. So if you just think about it, over a period of a few years, if you made 2 grams of the bad alpha-1 and it's stuck in the liver every day, over a period of a few years, a person would just turn into a giant lump of alpha-1 antitrypsin. It would take a few, but if you do the math, you figure it out. So there must be a recycling mechanism, and we have identified it. And actually, the body, your biology, is very, very smart, and so there are actually multiple recycling pathways in the liver. The liver recognizes that this Z-alpha-1 protein is abnormal and quickly tries to recycle it. And as I said, there are several mechanisms, several pathways that appears to use that. Unfortunately, a tiny percentage of the alpha-1 that gets made doesn't get recycled. And we don't know exactly what the tiny percentage is. It's small, but we don't know what the number is. And we don't know why that happens. Everybody that's ZZ has buildup in the liver, but not everybody who's ZZ has major liver damage. So again, everybody gets buildup. Why do some people get damage and some don't? We've done some studies, and again, this goes back to some of the very first research I ever did, where we took skin cells from children who'd had liver transplants with alpha-1, and we took skin cells from their ZZ brothers and sisters who had not had a liver transplant. And then we took those skin cells and grew them in a dish in the lab, and we tried to measure the speed at which the recycling happened. And it turned out that the recycling was slower in the people that had had the liver transplant. So that suggests that inefficient or kind of, they did recycle, it was just slower. So that suggests that the slower recycling allows more to build up and allows more liver damage, and that's one risk factor for liver damage in Alpha-1. And that's part of the reason why we've looked at ways of speeding up the recycling, because we think that, that seems to be would be a good idea based on the studies we've done. And the other thing about the buildup is it's not the same in every cell. So some cells in the liver will have very large amounts of Alpha-1 built up. Sometimes you look at it under the microscope on a liver biopsy sample, and most of the cell is taken up with a big lump of Alpha-1, but then the liver cell right next to it may have no Alpha-1 in it. And we don't know why that is. It's probably important because the liver cells with the large amounts of Alpha-1 appear to die off, and then they get replaced in the liver. And it's this process of cells dying and getting replaced, which over years is bad for you. And just like on your skin, if you repeatedly damage an area of your skin, if you scratch your skin or cut your skin, the first time it heals, and maybe there's a teensy scar, but maybe there isn't. But if you cut or damage your skin repeatedly in the same spot, then a big scar is going to develop, and eventually you're going to have a big problem, right? And the same is true in your liver. If your liver, a couple cells die and it's not really a big deal to get replaced, then okay, that's great. But if your liver cells are repeatedly dying off and getting replaced, over time, scar tissue builds up in the liver and damage can occur. And so we think that's what happens in the Alpha-1 liver. And so you were very alert, and you touched on the things we don't know yet. We don't know the percentage that doesn't get recycled. We don't know why one cell has a buildup and the other doesn't. But these are all things that are hotly being examined.
Okay.
Does that answer it?
Yeah, and so when my son goes in for a yearly ultrasound on his liver, is that what they're looking for? They're looking for damage from buildup, or is it something else then?
Right. They're looking for scar tissue buildup or tumors. Sometimes the liver can develop a tumor. They're also looking for blood flow. So as the liver gets damaged over time, the blood flow through the liver can become abnormal, and that can be a bad thing for you and need treatment. So that's what the ultrasound's looking for.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? Well, I've got a question then while other people think. Dr. Teckman, I've read a little bit about how the way that the Alpha-1 antitrypsin that's developed or that's manufactured, or whatever the right terminology is, in the ZZ liver is such that it almost kind of lends itself to, I know they call it polymerization, but it's almost like there's hooks on the side, and so these proteins tend to sort of clump, as you were saying. And has there been any research into, sort of finding a way to sort of stop this polymerization? And if so, would it help, or
right.
You're just going to have still have proteins floating around rather than clumping
right.
cells?
So, yeah, that question was right on cue, because that was the next thing I was going to talk about if no one asked about it. Right. So one of the interesting things is that a protein, when it first gets made, is a long chain, and then it folds up inside the cell, and when it folds up is when any protein is able to do its job. And it's kind of analogous to a paper airplane. If you take just a sheet of paper and you try to flip it across the room, it just sort of flutters down. But if you take the sheet of paper and you fold it into a paper airplane, then it flies a long way. And it's still a piece of paper, but the shape, it makes all the difference. And that's the way proteins work. The shape determines if the protein can do its job. And the normal Alpha-1 protein has to fold up in a very complicated shape. And when it folds up into that shape, the cell, the liver cell, recognizes that it's done folding and releases it into the blood. So it's like an assembly line. If you have a you're making automobiles on an assembly line, and at the very last step, there's a quality control guy right there, and they start the engine and be sure it runs, and then if it's working, they drive it out of the plant. And if it doesn't start or the tire's flat or something's wrong with it, then they pull it off the line and don't ship it. And that happens in the cell. So the normal alpha-1 protein folds up, is checked and released. The abnormal Z alpha-1 protein is not able to fold up very well. And of all the molecules of alpha-1 that are made, only about 15%, 15%, are able to fold up enough to get released. And 85% of them are not able to do so. And the cell recognizes that and holds on to them. And then it tries to send them down these recycle pathways. And the problem is that takes a while. And usually these processes happen in seconds or minutes inside a cell. They're very, very rapid. But the abnormal alpha-1 protein, if it can't get released, it kind of hangs around the cell for a while the cell figures out what to do with it and how to send it to the recycle pathway. And we think, although we don't know for sure, but we think that when these alpha-1 molecules are just hanging around and not going anywhere, that's bad. And then they tend to form what are called polymers, so just like you say. And it's not just clumping together. I mean, clumping sort of sounds like a nonspecific interaction, like maybe you just take a handful of clay and smash it together. But what happens, this polymerization is actually a very, very organized sticking together of one molecule to the next. And I would say it's people standing side by side, and if you take your hand and you put it in the pocket of the person next to you, and then the person puts their hand in the pocket of the person next to them, and that person puts their hand in the pocket of the person next to them, and everybody does that, and everybody's got their hand in the next guy's pocket, and so people get stuck together in a very reproducible way. And that's really what happens with these Z molecules, is a piece of the molecule gets stuck inside their neighbor, and then that molecule sticks out a piece, and it gets stuck in the side of its neighbor, and you get this long chain of molecules that are improperly folded up, and they call that a polymer. And there's some evidence that and then that polymer can stick around the cell for a long period of time. And there's some evidence that it's the buildup of the abnormal protein specifically in this polymer type of form, which is very toxic to the cell. And we've done some experiments in cells in addition, in mice in the lab, where if we increase the amount of polymer in a cell or in the liver, the damage is worse. And if we experimentally reduce the accumulation of the polymer, then the liver's healthier and the cell's healthier. So that there seems to be a direct relationship between the amount of polymer and the damage that's done. And so there's been intense research in this area. And just like you say, I mean, this is an incredibly smart call because all you guys are thinking like crazy. So right, there have been quite a few experiments to look at how could you block the formation of that polymer. And if you did that, would that allow more of the molecules to go through the recycle pathway? Would there be less buildup? And there have been medications that have been tried to reduce the polymer. There have been all kinds of special approaches to try to do that. And there's still a lot of work being done on that. And several very large drug companies are trying to look at drugs that would, basically a drug that would, fill the pocket so that the molecule couldn't stick its hand in the neighbor's pocket, would block it in a physical way, just like that. So none of those medications are ready for human testing yet. But in fact, there's only been one trial of alpha-1 liver disease drug treatment that was specific for alpha-1, which was published by us here in St. Louis a number of years ago. And we had a drug that, again, it cured the mice, but when we couldn't get the dose high enough in people. So when the dose that worked in the mice was approached in people couldn't tolerate it. They got too sick and the side effects were too great. So again, there's a lot of work on that and trying to figure out how you can, get something to do, that thing, block the polymer. But so far we don't have it yet.
So Dr. Teckman not only does research, but he treats kids with Alpha-1, and I know we've got quite a few parents on the line tonight. Do you have any questions that you might want to ask him about, in general terms? Obviously, he doesn't have access to your kids' medical files, but in general terms, do you have any questions about your kids' health? You must, Joanne.
Oh, the only question that I have is about the ultrasound. When they check my son, they always double check his pancreas, and he always has some sort of weirdness in his pancreas. So I'm just wondering, why do they also check the pancreas and the other whatever else they check?
Well, in that one case, I'm not sure. If your liver gets sick, other organs in the abdomen can get sick. And as I said, there's this problem that all the blood from the intestine goes through the liver on the way back to the heart. And that's because when you eat food, the food gets digested and the nutrients leave your intestine and enter the bloodstream. And so the blood leaving the intestine is laden with nutrients. And that blood goes to the liver next, and the liver then processes all those nutrients. And so if the liver gets damaged, scar tissue builds up in the liver, and it's like a drain in your house that's clogged, so it runs slowly. And so that's what happens in the liver. Scar tissue builds up in the liver, and the blood from the intestine can't get through very well and starts to back up. And that can be bad, and it can affect other organs in the abdomen. And so we commonly are ultrasounding other organs to look for any problem. Usually the pancreas is not one of the ones that would be more commonly affected. So, maybe there's just something funny about the pancreas in that situation. We all look different on the outside. We all look a little different on the inside. So, no two persons' insides are exactly the same. And as our imaging technology, ultrasound and MRIs and CT scans, as it gets more sophisticated, we see more and more variability between people. So just like my face is different from your face, my pancreas is different than yours. And the better the picture we make of the pancreas, the more we could go, hey, there's a little wrinkle in the pancreas right there. So sometimes we don't really know what to make of those things, and so we tend to look at them over and over. But I guess let me make a couple other comments. So again, I talked about the children's study, and we are still enrolling patients, and we still want more patients, but we have gotten to the point where we can begin to look at some of the results. So just this year, we reported the very first results from the study, and there were some interesting things, so I'll just touch on a couple of the things that we found so far. One of the things we found so far is that the vast majority of children with Alpha-1 are normal size. So Alpha-1, in most cases, doesn't make you short or underweight. There are a few people who seem to have trouble gaining weight early in life, but that's by far the exception, not the rule. And even children with very severe liver damage, most of them are normal size. Also, most of them look pretty much normal. So if you just, see the kid walking down the street, or even just the kid in the doctor's office, they really look fine. And many of them have very few symptoms, even if they have serious liver damage. So in order to see which kids have liver damage, you really have to be looking for it. You have to be carefully examining the abdomen, feeling around for enlarged liver or spleen or other abnormalities that go with the abnormal blood flow. You have to be carefully looking at a variety of blood tests. A lot of times people want to focus very much on what's called LFTs, which that stands for liver function test, which is kind of a dumb name because it doesn't actually measure any function of the liver, but commonly in medical circles they're called LFTs, and it's an alphabet soup of names of blood tests: ALT, AST, SGOT, SGPT. These are all very similar blood tests that are commonly done on liver patients, and it turns out that they're not very useful in Alpha-1. So some people with no liver damage will have abnormal levels of ALT. And some people with a lot of liver damage will have abnormal levels of ALT. But I actually have patients myself who have very severe liver damage who have normal levels of ALT. So people who are not very sophisticated in liver disease pay an incredible amount of attention to the ALT level. And if it goes up or down 2 points, there's a huge anxiety or huge relief. And it turns out that that's not valid. That we look at those tests, but there are many other tests that you need to look at as well to really understand what's going on in the liver, as well as the ultrasound, as you said. Now, not every patient needs an ultrasound every year, but some do. And so a combination of physical exam, history of the patient, blood tests, and ultrasound or other imaging tests are needed to really keep track of a patient's liver. And really everybody with Alpha-1, whether adult or child, should be evaluated by somebody who knows something about the liver every year. And now, for some people, they have a regular general physician who's very knowledgeable in the liver, and if their liver really isn't badly affected, then their general physician can probably, just monitor them, and that's probably great. But, not everybody needs a super liver specialist or anything, but everybody should have their liver evaluated every year, because you can get severe liver damage with minimal symptoms, and if you're not paying attention to the liver, people can get very sick very quickly, and it might have been able to be avoided, things like that. So that's sort of, our first look at some of the information from the children's study.
I'm going to ask a question. I'm Joanne's husband with the same child here. General liver health, are there things that we can do with our son to promote general liver health, or is it just general health is what we are promoting?
Right, so there are some things. In Alpha-1, probably the first thing, don't smoke. Mm-hmm. And you don't be around smoke. Now, don't be crazy. I have a patient who is in the Boy Scouts, and they go on camp outs, and the family's concerned about the campfire. I'm like, well, just don't be near it and don't stand in the smoke, right? You can still go on camp outs, but and then it's also other dusty exposure, so stay out of the hay loft, that kind of thing. Also with liver, it's important, don't get fat. If you get fat, your liver gets fat. And your liver doesn't like being fat. It doesn't work well if you're overweight. And just like any other organ, your heart, your lungs, mm-hmm. your joints, your body doesn't want to be overweight. So don't be overweight. Then people ask about drinking alcohol. So if there are guidelines, they're not well tested in Alpha-1, but there are guidelines for other liver diseases. And if people have mild liver disease, and they're adults, then the sort of quote unquote safe intake of alcohol for mild liver disease is about 3 drinks per week. So that would be a drink is defined as a 12-ounce bottle of beer, or a small cocktail or a 6-ounce glass of wine. It's, not a big gulp. And so, and eating, plenty of fruits and vegetables, all that kind of stuff. So that's, the main things. Now, we did do a series of experiments over the last few years, and we found in the Alpha-1 mice, so we have these, as I mentioned before, we have these mice that carry the human Z gene, and they develop the same liver disease that human ZZ people get. And so we've used these mice for years to study Alpha-1 and to study drugs and how to make people healthier. And a number of years ago, we did a study in the mice, and we actually did this for a different reason, but what we found out something important by accident. And what we found out was that if we gave the mice what we call non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, so that's the class of painkiller that's ibuprofen, Motrin, aspirin, Aleve, naproxen, those things. If we gave the mice that class of medication, it made their liver worse. And it made their liver worse because, strangely, in alpha-antitrypsin deficiency, those medications actually turn up the production of alpha-antitrypsin in the liver. And as we've said, it's the buildup of the alpha-antitrypsin in the liver if you're ZZ, which is bad. And so you don't want to make more, because if you make more builds up. And that's what happens in the mice. If we gave them a lot of ibuprofen-type medicine, more alpha-1 built up in the liver, and they got worse. Now, acetaminophen or Tylenol is a whole different class of medicine, and it does not do the same thing. So there's been no human study of this, and it probably wouldn't be ethical, because we couldn't take a bunch of patients and say, here, take this medicine, let's see if it makes you worse. Right. But it's in the mice, it's been powerful enough that, I mention it to people, and when patients ask me, I'd say, if it were my child or me, I would take Tylenol and not ibuprofen. Now, people say, well, Tylenol isn't that bad for your liver. Well, overdosing Tylenol is bad for your liver. But normal dosing of Tylenol is not bad for your liver. In fact, normal doses of Tylenol are probably less toxic to your liver than normal doses of ibuprofen. So based on animal data, I try to steer my patients away from large amounts of NSAIDs. Now, sometimes adults will ask me, my doctor told me to take, a baby aspirin a day for my heart. And to that I say, well, maybe that's a good idea, right? I mean, I sort of don't want to, negate anything someone's doctor's told them because I think it's good for your heart. But, outside of that sort of thing, if I had a headache and I had Alpha-1, I would take a Tylenol and not an ibuprofen.
Thank you.
Dr. Teckman, this is Barbara calling. I have Alpha-1, and I'm a ZZ. And 3 out of my 4 children have it, and 2 of my grandchildren also have Alpha-1. They haven't been tested for their phenotypes yet, but what are the chances that I'm assuming that we've all got the lung, we've never been diagnosed with the liver. What are the chances that it could turn into the liver?
Well, that's one of the things we're trying to understand with the children's study and with this study that I'm talking about. We're going to get started in the adults. The only evidence we have to answer that question is the study from Sweden. So in 1970, in Sweden, which has a very high rate of alpha-antitrypsin deficiency, in the southern half about of Sweden, some doctors there organized a newborn screening program. So, just like in the United States, a baby's born, or in Canada, a baby's born, and you prick the heel, and they get tested for a bunch of diseases right at the beginning of life. And Alpha-1 is not one of the things that's tested at birth, but this group in Sweden, they tested everybody who was born, every baby for Alpha-1 for a period of about 2 years. So they tested 200,000 newborns. And out of that group, they identified 127 that were ZZ. And then they followed those babies very carefully as they grew up. And they followed them very carefully for the first few years. Now those people obviously are adults. And they're still followed about once per decade. I mean, in Sweden, it's a fairly small country, and they have centralized medical care, so they pretty much know who all these people are and where they go, although access to the data and to the people is highly restricted. But about once a decade, they still, contact the people and look at their medical charts. And what that study showed was that the risk of life-threatening liver disease in children was about 5%. That's pretty low. But the risk of any kind of liver problem in childhood, depending on how you defined it, was between 15 and 50%. So, if you defined liver problem as an abnormal blood test, then that was like half of the kids had abnormal blood tests. But if you defined it as, feeling tired or something like that, then that was a lower number. There were some children that had asthma, which is associated with Alpha-1 in children, but none of them developed emphysema in childhood or any kind of damaging lung disease. And they had pulmonary function testing as teenagers, and at 18, a few of the unwise teenagers, as teenagers are sometimes unwise, began smoking. There weren't very many smokers, but there were a few that had to needle their parents and start smoking. And the smokers, when they were 18, did have slightly less lung function than the non-smokers at age 18, but they were all still in the quote-unquote normal range. And but subsequently, none of those people have developed any more liver disease. And so that's a very powerful experiment when you have more than 100 people who've been followed since birth. However, there are other things that can happen to people with Alpha-1 which have not happened to this group. For example, we know, and I've seen it myself, and it's reported from other medical centers, that some teenagers with Alpha-1 can come down with severe liver disease kind of out of the blue. And none of these people in the Swedish study had that. And we know that other things can happen to the liver. There can be tumors in the liver and other things. And none of the people in Sweden had that. And so it's really raised the question if the Swedish study was really very representative of anybody outside of Sweden. I mean, Sweden is a genetically very homogeneous country. All these people were, pretty much pure Swedes. And, like we were talking earlier, we think that other genes that people inherit probably have a big modifying effect on if you get liver disease or not, or if you get lung disease or not, et cetera. And so, a lot of people have thought that in a more mixed population like the United Kingdom or North America, that there may be a very different set of modifier genes. And so we're not completely sure how applicable this Swedish study is to North America. But there it is, and that's really the information that we've got. So the only other real useful information is, again, from Sweden. And one of the doctors that discovered Alpha-1 deficiency back in 1963, Sten Eriksson, and for a number of years in the 80s, Sten collected every autopsy or every death record of anyone in Sweden that died who had Alpha-1. And again, because of, it's a small country and with pretty centralized medical care, he was really able to account for almost everybody that died over like a decade who had Alpha-1. And when he looked at that, it turned out that as people got older with Alpha-1, the risk of serious liver disease increased. And as many as 50% of older adults had very severe liver damage. Now, not all of them died of liver disease. As a matter of fact, some of them died of a heart attack when they were 82. but they had severe liver. They were living at that time with severe liver damage. So our sense is that severe liver disease can happen in children, but that it's uncommon, and that liver damage in young adults is uncommon, but that as people get older, the risk of liver disease increases dramatically. And but again, this is imperfect information, especially as applied to North America, which is why we're trying to do these studies that we're doing. So how are we going to predict if your family is going to get it? Is what we're trying to do, and that's why we need to do some of these genetic testing so we can have a second test. So you're diagnosed with Alpha-1, and then we do a second test to see if you're susceptible to liver damage or not, and that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay, so would you suggest that, I know I haven't had a liver screening done yet. One daughter has, but would you suggest that they have it done every so many years?
Well, I think, as I said, everybody with Alpha-1 should, have a liver evaluation every year.
Okay.
And that doesn't necessarily mean, and I'm not saying that everybody needs an ultrasound or a CT or a blood test, but I think everybody needs a doctor who knows about the liver to check them out. And for some people, that's going to be a physical exam and, very rudimentary blood tests, and they're great and fine, and you're done. And for other people, it's going to be a more detailed evaluation. And for people with serious liver damage, are at risk for liver cancer. And the most recent recommendations for liver cancer are that people with severe liver damage should have an ultrasound every 6 months, because that's the frequency at which you can detect a liver tumor early enough to cure it. So people with cirrhosis, so people with severe liver damage should have an ultrasound every 6 months. But that's not all Alpha-1 patients, but that's just ones with cirrhosis. So this is just the kind of information that people need to review with their doctor.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, we're at 9 o'clock now. Are there any more questions? Because I've got one more. Okay, well, maybe we'll finish off. Dr. Teckman, we understand that adults with liver disease, they get liver disease because of this polymerization, right, and fibrosis and cirrhosis and so on. How is it that a newborn baby can have severe liver problems associated with Alpha-1, having not had those sort of years of buildup of the abnormal protein in the liver?
Right. Well, we don't know that, and that's one of the things we're trying to learn from the children's study. The buildup begins at birth, and the newborn liver is very sensitive to damage of all kinds, even in people who don't have Alpha-1. If a newborn baby, if babies get certain infections or other things happen to them, the liver can be dramatically affected. So we don't know the answer to that, but again, that's one of the key things we're looking at. Why do some people get sick early in life and some don't?
But so what has actually happened to the livers in these babies? Is it a buildup of the abnormal Alpha-1? It's just
yes. So in some babies, in all babies, the buildup begins when they're born. If you look at a liver sample under a microscope from a brand new newborn with Alpha-1, it looks normal. But by 6 weeks of age, you can see under the microscope the buildup of Alpha-1 in the liver. And so the buildup is happening. In some babies, their liver seems to be able to cope with that and not get sick for decades. In some babies, though, the liver swells up and turns red, basically gets sick, and some of them get an abnormal type of jaundice. So everybody knows that a newborn baby can get a jaundice and they get put under a light and such, but there's an abnormal kind of jaundice that a newborn can get and that a newborn with Alpha-1 can get. But in a lot of those babies where they get jaundice and the liver's sick in the first couple months, most of those babies get well on their own. And we saw that in the Swedish study I was talking about. So in the Swedish study, they had about 25, I think, 28 babies that got this abnormal jaundice out of 100. But most of them, it went away on its own in a couple months. And we do see that all the time in newborns with Alpha-1. But in a small group, it doesn't go away, or it goes away, but it kind of progresses into liver damage, and those are the kids that need liver transplants, when they're just a few years old. But that's only the minority of patients, and why it's that few, we don't know. That's what we're hoping to answer.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, then I think we'll let Dr. Teckman go. I want to thank you very much, Jeff, for agreeing to do this for us, and actually for Simon Ling, for getting us in touch with you. And to all the people who took part, thank you very much. Hope you learned something. And I just want to remind everybody that here at Alpha-1 Canada, we produced a Christmas video. It's got a Christmas theme, but it's all about Alpha-1 and liver transplants and lung transplants and coverage for treatment in a situation where Santa Claus's brother has Alpha-1. So if you haven't already had a look at it, it's on our website. If you go to our website, you'll see it right in front of your nose. It's right at the top of the page. Please have a look. And on behalf of everyone at Alpha-1 Canada and the board of directors, I want to wish everybody a happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, whatever the case may be, and a great new year. So thank you very much. And,
well, Jim, thanks for having me. And as I said, Jim has my email, so anyone has questions or wants to be involved in research in the future, send me an email. And if you have more questions sometime, I'm happy to come back. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Jim.